Okay, welcome, Peep Laja. I know I'm saying that right because I practiced it over and over. You are CEO of two companies,
Correct.
Wynter and CXL, and we'll
Yeah.
talk about them. And what I love is that you've been building companies for years. You founded a SaaS startup back in 2009 that was about building and selling online courses, and it didn't work out. We're going to talk about that. But now you're running these two companies. Also, you're just a fascinating person. You've got 37,000 followers on Twitter and almost 26,000 followers on LinkedIn. So I'm going to pick your brain on that, right? You've definitely built an audience and a community of people that really value the opinions you have, the expertise you have. So we will talk about that. And I just want to give a quick background on Wynter. Wynter is spelled with a Y. Is a messaging optimization platform for B2B companies. So essentially, if you want to find out like what messaging is working, what messaging hits home, what falls flat, and the customers include Drift, Unilever, and GoToMeeting. And then CXL is a skill building platform for marketers that uses the world's top 1% of folks that are really good in marketing, and they are instructors. And your customers there include Google, Cisco, and Hilton. So,
And there's also have an agency called Speero, which is a customer experience optimization agency. One of the leaders in the experimentation space. We work with me to senior, me to large enterprises, helping them scale their experimentation programs.
awesome. And that's based on your experimentation and testing background, really.
That's
So,
right,
like,
because that was the first. That was the first company that I built that didn't die. Initially it was called CXL Agency that we just spun off into a separate brand.
got it. So you've got this portfolio of companies, which is really cool. Before we dive in, I want to just let the listeners know. So the short story of how I got Pep on the show is you sent out a tweet, and it was basically this: a podcast booking company is pitching me saying they can get me on 2 shows a week and nobody else can match their success rate. Let's see about that. And then somebody actually emailed me about this, knowing that I have a podcast and that I'm the host. And so then and so here we are, right? Because I invited you to be on my show. So I'm actually curious, before we dive into the meat of this podcast, I'm curious, how many shows have you booked? And then, like, why did you want to run this test? I know you're a tester at heart, right? Why did you want to run this test to begin with? Like, what's your goal with podcasts?
I booked around 30, which was quite a bit. In fact, some days I'm like, oh my God, why did I? Because there are some days where I'm doing like 3 a day, which is a lot. Just talking. But why am I doing this? It's to raise awareness around Wynter. Because when it comes to building a company, the fact that people know that you exist is half the battle. Most companies die because nobody cares and nobody knows they are even around. And Wynter is still an early stage startup. We're customer funded, bootstrap still. And so I can't buy my way into market share. Have to do it the organic way.
That's right. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, that's a lot of shows, and doing 3 a day. How many have you done today? Am I the first?
Today you are my first. Not my first meeting. So I've had like 2 internal meetings and 3 sales demos.
Wow.
I am still in the phase where I do every single sales demo.
Yeah.
Which is of course great learning. Also, helps me test different ways to pitch the product.
Yeah, and so I think what's helpful, though, you've already spent years building your audiences, right? So that awareness that Do you talk about your companies a bunch, like on LinkedIn and on Twitter, to get awareness?
I mean,
Okay.
not in the way that, hey, come buy my stuff, because nobody wants to hear about that. But I share lessons learned, things that I'm doing, that might be interesting. Like how I rebranded and repositioned Wynter, because we launched as a separate brand called Copy Testing, and had a different kind of an angle. So we changed that. So I've been sharing those lessons, and also things that we've changed with CXL over the years. So definitely
Nice.
trying to do, I guess they call it product-led storytelling.
That's a good term for it. Yeah. So more of like educational, some interesting, something that's more enticing and helpful for your listeners versus selling.
Exactly. Always trying to, make it interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, let's dive into the questions. So, you were building the SaaS startup, right, for 2 years. Probably
Mhm.
learned a ton during that time. What were your big learnings about that startup, because it didn't work out, right? And so,
Yeah.
what have you learned that has helped you succeed with Wynter and CXL and Speero?
So that company was called Traindom, and when we shut it down, which of course hurt, because we had poured our sweat and tears and life into it for 2 years, and it always hurts to kill your baby. And then when we did the retro, like, okay, key reasons for not succeeding were: one, we didn't have an audience to sell to; B, didn't have money to buy an audience; and also, like, I as the founder and head of marketing, didn't have any name recognition. And so out of that, I told myself that for my next company, I'm gonna build an audience first, not product first, but audience first, and then see what they want to buy, and then build that. And so I started CXL back then as Conversion Excel, as a blog. And for the first year, I was just blogging and building an audience, people interested in conversion optimization, and then built an agency because they wanted to hire me as a consultant. And off I went.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so those are some pretty key big lessons. How big did the startup get? Was you, and did you have some other folks helping out?
I had like a co-founder team, which was like a development company. So I partnered with a dev company to do all the software development work. So they were like a 49% partner. I was 51. So I pitched them the idea, and then they bought the idea. We
Got
didn't
it.
hire anybody else other than the partners.
Got it. So really, essentially, like a big lesson for you was, yes, you should build the product, but what's even more essential is like getting to your audience and understanding what their needs are, and driving awareness and building that community, and that's even as important, right?
Yeah, well, if you're bootstrapping, and you can't buy awareness by doing a lot of paid acquisition, then you just need an audience, organic audience, and building that audience takes time. It's noisy out there, and or you need to be very patient. I ran out of patience and shut it down, because it's a difficult choice whether, like, maybe year 3 will be different. But it was kind of a zombie state. I mean, it wasn't exactly dead. We had paying customers, but it wasn't exactly alive either. I mean, it didn't make enough money to pay the bills.
So what made you decide to shut it down? Like, what was that day that you're like, you know what, we have to just stop and move on?
Essentially, I ran out of ideas what to do to drive results. Like, everything I had thought of, I had tried. And so, like, we could stick with it, but really I had no idea what to do. So that was kind of it.
That got it. Okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense. That makes sense. So let's take a little bit of a turn here, and like you've got a lot of expertise and thoughts and opinions on content marketing. You put content out there on social
Mhm.
media. What do you think about like content marketing? How has it changed over the years? Like, what exactly has changed since, I'll pick a year, right? 2010. versus today? What do you think are the key things we need to understand and marketers need to stop doing or start doing?
I think the fundamentals are the same as content in B2B, especially because that's most of my background is B2B. In B2B, content marketing is just so powerful and it works. I mean, I built my companies on top of content marketing, so I know firsthand that it works. It works. What has changed mainly is competition. Also, of course, new medium like TikTok wasn't around and so on and so forth, or Instagram. But competition. So there have never been as many brands as there are today. There have never been as many individual creators as there are today. Because back then, in 2010, money was less readily available, like funding for startups. Today, there's more capital, cheap money than ever before. Technological barriers that were there in 2010 have completely gone. Now it's so easy to come and put up your own company. It's cheap and affordable. Technological barriers are basically gone. Also, not just in tech, but also in like manufacturing. Like you can outsource everything to Alibaba, and they do. Like a lot of these D2C success case studies, like Warby Parker or Dollar Shave Club. These are all. None of them have their own factories. It's all outsourced. So what this has done, obviously, is that in the last 10 years, the competition has intensified 100 times. Same, not regular competition, but also in terms of content. People writing blog posts or doing like LinkedIn or TikToks, whatever. So what does that mean? That means that what used to be a good enough effort that actually was good enough to get results is not good enough anymore. The standard for the minimum quality for your content is just way higher. You need to be more consistent, so you need to produce a higher volume of content. So I think I saw this recent study where they looked at the YouTube channels that had at least 1 million followers, and on average, how many videos did they have? And it was something like 3,500 videos. So like, if you produce a video a day, how many years is that? So it just gives you an idea of the consistency and volume of content you need to be putting out. And then obviously quality. We have limited attention spans in the sense that we can't pay attention to everything, and higher quality content will just stand out. So if you do mediocre content, it kind of doesn't do anything.
Yeah, so we're kind of under this pressure to put more content out, and it needs to be high quality. How do you start thinking about like solving for that? Maybe how have you been doing that? And maybe that gets into some of the later questions, like how do you actually do this for Wynter, for CXL?
Yeah, absolutely. So, with CXL is a more mature company now that we have a content team that is, publishing content. Obviously, we have very strict internal standards for what's publishing worthy content. So we don't publish just anything. It needs to match a certain quality criteria. And then, I mean, we get our nice, decent share of guest posts as well that we can publish, because we're a domain authority, some 85, so it's very attractive backlink. We have a big audience, like 300,000 a month. So people want to get in front of our audience. So that's easier. So my own personal social media, what I have is I have content on my daily calendar. So first thing when I start my day, my work day, is I start with content. This is also my personal experimentation shows that if you post content around US Central Time, so like 6, 7 a.m. my time, it gets the best reach. If I do it like at 11 a.m., it will be half of it. I don't know why, but there's something to it. This is like with these algorithms, they need a certain amount of engagement signals, comments and likes and whatever, so they would amplify the distribution of this content, like give it more reach. So if early morning you get enough, people to signal something, then LinkedIn will or Twitter will put it in front of more people. So that's one thing. So putting it on your calendar, doing it first in the morning. Obviously, it's different for Europeans or Pacific or whatever. And for Wynter, I can't blogging. I didn't choose as a strategy because Wynter domain authority is some 35. I won't rank for anything, with that. So SEO is not an immediate strategy. Yeah, long term, yes. So we are producing content, but I am completely aware that this content will not do anything business-wise today. It's a long-term play. So but I need to capture leads today as well. So what do? I started a virtual monthly event. I call it Wynter Games. So every month we put up a mini conference, if you will, 8 speakers. And so I have something the event is free. So I have something to shout out to the world. I have something to, promote. And of course, I try to make sure that the topics are, as interesting as possible. And then obviously every talk is recorded. That content is repurposed also into blog posts and social media clips, things like that.
That's great. It's in April, right? Or am I wrong? The next Wynter Games.
Event?
Yeah.
So it's every single month. So the next one is March 31st, and then we'll have an April event and a May event. And the amount of signups I get per event is growing month over month. So last one I had was like more than 1,600 people. So it's great.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. And who are the speakers coming up March 31st?
So March event is our focus is on storytelling. So we have Joe Lazauskas, the author of Storytelling Edge. He runs marketing for Contently. I have Kevin Rogers, who's an extraordinary storyteller. I follow him I'm friends with him on Facebook. The guy knows how to tell a story. My God. So Wynter Games, just Google it, you'll see the full lineup.
Well, storytelling is like one of the bigger things to focus on and to improve that skill, right, as a marketer. So
exactly. So what I said earlier about there have never been as many brands as today. So the competition is nuts, right? So 3 things are happening. If you position your company through what do you do? We do email marketing or we do SEO. You're a commodity. Every category that gets more mature, like a lot of players in it, it gets commoditized. So there are the premium players, and then there are commodity players. And commodity players say exactly the same things as the category leaders. So if HubSpot does, CRM, and I'm an upstart, a challenger brand, I say I'm also a CRM. You're going to lose. You're going to die. You're never going to go anywhere if you use the exact same messaging as HubSpot, as the category leader. So the way to compete with category leaders is twofold. So either through innovation, you find a way to do something better, objectively better, faster, cheaper, whatever it is, But very few can play that game. Like especially in like SaaS, it's rare that a tool comes out that is like, oh my God, this is just objectively better. I think Descript came out, which is the podcast editing tool. You might know of it. Like change the game. Like it's just so much better than anything else out there, Or Tesla has better range than other electric cars for now. But so most of us are not innovators. So what can we compete on? Brand, and a huge part of that is your messaging and storytelling. And you want to go against the grain. You want to go against the category leader. So if HubSpot is this, I am not that. I am the anti that. In fact, what HubSpot is doing is bullshit, and you should do it the other way. You tell a story. You repel an audience in order to attract another audience, things like that. So learning how to do that is essential, I think, for the next 5 to 10 years and maybe forever.
I love it, and I'm going to put that on my calendar. It's a free event, so I'm in.
Yes, exactly.
Thanks for talking through that. I love that. That is definitely video clip worthy, and there's so much passion because there's conviction, right? Like that this is the way to go. This is the way. You can't just do things the way of the old days, right? Because there's so much competition and we all feel it. And I agree with you, like brand storytelling, you got to be good. And you have to understand how are other folks talking about themselves, and you need to be different, and you need to be clear, and you need to be consistent about this across different channels that you're using. So this is not easy stuff, right?
No, and also like I've been on a I'm telling stories myself, and I'm trying to learn from the best. And recently, I've been binging on storytelling books, and I'm actually appalled by how few of them are practical for business storytelling. They all tell you about the arc of the story and the characters and the hero's journey and all that stuff. But like, okay, great. How do I now implement it on my website? Crickets. There's no advice on that. So I'm gonna fill that gap. I'm gonna help marketers compete with a better story. So that's because Wynter is also in this business, because it's ridiculous that you don't have any data on how your messaging is working, how your story is working, what do they like about your story or not. The only thing you as a marketer can measure, did they sign up or not, did they buy or not. So imagine this is an offline situation. I'm selling to you, this is a sales pitch, but I cannot see how you react to my sales pitch. Like, I'm pitching you, you might be rolling your eyes, but I don't know. I only see if you sign or not. In real life, this is unthinkable. It's ridiculous. This is like a comedy scene. But this is exactly how sales is happening online. So Wynter is giving you the data on like what about your story is actually good, and what you should get rid of.
Yeah, I think that a lot of companies approach it in a way of like, internally, this is how we want to talk about ourselves. This is our story. This is what we think will resonate. And they don't know, right? Because they
it's
are
a good
not.
Start. That's where you start. Like, what are we about? Getting clear on your identity and what do you stand for. That's amazing. And then, but does it resonate? But does it resonate with the audience? And like, there's probably aspects of your story that are really like keep people nod their heads. Yes, I want that. And then there's other stuff that is maybe cheesy or unclear, or something that you should just cut.
Yeah. What about like, what's the difference with just asking, right? Let's say you you just ask a bunch of your customers, like, does this resonate? Does this messaging make sense? Or prospects, right? You can always just ask
well,
them.
I mean, essentially that's what you should do. But it's very hard, because I mean, it's hard. It's just hard to get any responses. Like, if you have a popular email newsletter, like, what's your click-through rate, or what's your response rate to those emails? I mean, it's very low. I mean, we're talking single digits percentage points here. So people are busy; they don't want to give you feedback. Or if you're doing sales, like you're pitching prospects, I mean, it's hard enough to get a prospect to even like engage with you. Not to mention them giving you feedback of like what resonated. It's just a hard problem. And obviously that's, again, the business that I'm in, solving that problem.
That's right. So I'm interested to ask you, like, you've got customers for Wynter. Did they go? Has there been an event where like they went in there thinking this is the right messaging to use, and then it came back where they tested it and it's like, no, that's actually not the right one.
Oh yeah,
It's completely different.
Totally. So there's a venture fund using us for their early stage startups. And early stage startups are always thinking about what should be our value proposition, or how to position ourselves, because you can go many directions. And so there's this one company called True North, an early stage SaaS company, that they did multiple rounds of message testing with Wynter, where they were like, this way or this way or this way, and they completely changed their positioning, and based off of this feedback. And by that, they were able to increase their pricing 10 times, because they found something that is far more valuable than they were initially saying. And that, I mean, price increase of 10 times, it's nuts. It's ridiculous. And then they changed their whole product roadmap also off the back of this feedback. That's just a big change. A lot of examples that I see on a daily basis is companies leading with a headline, and you know how important headlines are. It just capture attention piqued your interest is what the headline should do. And if right off the bat it does not resonate, it's just I mean, sales is hard enough as it is. You're just creating so much unnecessary friction in the sales process.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you for explaining that, and also like how your tool helps with that. I want to ask you, who do you think is doing some innovative things with their content? Just going back to content and who's doing it well. Like, what are some examples you've seen of companies or people doing really cool things with content?
Yeah, I think companies that are doing different things with content is who wins. So, for instance, Harry Dry and marketingexamples.com, he came out of the woodworks in 2019 and now has a massive following built in like a year and a half. And what is he doing? He's using a different format than anybody else. Everybody else is writing this blog post like it's still 2007. And unless it's somehow ridiculously good, or you're HubSpot, so you can rank with anything, it's not a good strategy. So you should create content that's the unique format. And so marketing examples is an example of that. Another example is growth.design. So again, this guy who came out of nowhere, they're doing this basically this tear downs, completely different way of presenting content, completely unique angle. And then what's also interesting about both Harry and this growth.design guys is that there's a higher degree of barrier of entry to producing that level of content. Not any guy you hire from Upwork, anybody you hire from Upwork can write a blog post, a shitty blog post, a mediocre, piece of crap. But the stuff that they're doing, not everybody is able to do that. It requires more time, more investment, more thinking, all these things, which are moats. So the way I think about producing content is that the harder it is to create what you're doing, the stronger your moat, because it's harder to replicate what you're doing. That's what we also see with some of the more popular, let's say creators, Substacks, like Websmith, what he's doing with his e-commerce newsletter, like the depth and the detail and all that stuff. It's hard to replicate. So the quality or a different format.
Yeah, and this goes back to what you already said. Like more content that's just good enough is not good enough. So you need something that stands out, that's high quality.
I think it's like all in or nothing. So there's save your money. Don't do mediocre content because the impact is zero. So if you have mediocre people writing mediocre content, put that money elsewhere. Put that in, I don't know, Google Ads or just do something and make a better product. Just it doesn't do anything. Or if you want to do content marketing, it's like be truly different. Do something else or just be better. And of course, consistency is killer.
That reminds me of something I saw somebody posted in like a Slack group that I'm in, and they're like, we're looking for someone to do some light social media upkeep. And I'm like, oh gosh, I'm staying away from that, because that means that they're not using marketing and content as like the differentiator, which you need. That's what your marketing team should be, is thinking about what's going to be different, what's going to be quality, and make that part of your business strategy. And there's no such thing as like light upkeep of your social media anymore, because now social media is like one of your channels that needs to be driving revenue.
I mean, if you're a B2B company, you have your corporate handles, your corporate LinkedIn page or your Twitter. For those, light upkeep might be okay because nobody wants to follow those anyway. So that's your newsroom. Like, oh, we just released this new update and we have the following software improvements, so that's fine, because like increasingly it is about the personal brands associated with the corporate brand. It's different for B2C. It's in B2B, you see some companies executing really well on just the names behind the companies, just putting themselves out there.
Yeah, I was also going to mention another example I just thought of somebody that just entered this the like the SaaS space, and he is his name is Shiv, and he has a company called How to SaaS, and he puts out like these drawings. He essentially makes these bite-sized drawings that show you the problems with B2B marketing or the problems with B2B growth, like the way we should think about strategy, the way we should think about marketing and content, just these simple drawings, which I don't, it's kind of like Harry Dry that's doing like the marketing examples, these simple sort of like, I took this scenario and I changed it and here's an image of it. But it's so just like if I showed it to my 7-year-old daughter, she'd look at the picture and be like, oh, that's so, there's like 3 colors, and she might not understand it, but she, can sort of see what's happening there. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Cool. So let's talk about differentiation a little bit. I'd love to ask you, like, what recommendations do you have for startups on how to differentiate when sameness is the default? Like you've mentioned this in some of your video clips, like sameness is the default. What's the strategy that startups should use?
Yeah, I mean, if differentiation was easy, it would be solved already. It's hard, which is, of course, why it's a great opportunity, because most will not be able to solve it. Most are not ready to put in the work. So broadly speaking, as I mentioned earlier, I think there are 2 ways that you can think about it. So one is you differentiate through innovation. Your product is just, you're doing something different that nobody else is doing. And that's a harder route to go. It might be better if you can do it better, objectively better, go for it. I think that's the easier route. But of course, innovation is hard. So I don't know if it is the easier route. But if you can compete on innovation, do it. The other way for I think, which is for the 90%, is you compete on brand. You compete on brand. Brand is your moat. And for brand, then that starts with your point of view. And so what is a brand? So the brand is what other people say about you. It's like, what does it say about me if I buy you? If I buy Patagonia, that says that I care about sustainability, I care about nature, I don't like Trump, things like that. Yeah. Whereas functionally, Patagonia is probably the same as like Columbia Outdoor, or a lot of brands, very competitive category, right? There are like Fjällräven and whatever these other brands. I don't actually know what they're about. I mean, I'm not also too familiar with this category, so I'm unable to comment. But you wanna stand for something, and obviously, if you want to analyze the category that you're in, and you understand, especially, what are the category leaders saying. So if you're against Patagonia, you cannot go in and, well, we're also sustainable. We also care about the environment. Well, that's great, good for you, but that's not how you can differentiate, because Patagonia is already doing it. They own the positioning in the mind of the customer. So positioning is not tangible, right? Positioning happens inside the mind of the customer. So if Patagonia is already sustainable, you need something else going for you.
Yeah. It's the share of mind. And like, if that's taken up by somebody else, then you're just going to get confused.
Exactly.
And also just buried, right, in the rest of the noise.
And you don't want to be about multiple ideas. A brand standing for multiple ideas at once is weak. I mean, it's very difficult to pull off. In fact, I don't really know, of a brand that has successfully pulled it off. It probably exists, but like if we think about, let's say, like big brands we all know, like Nike is like, championing athleticism, but there are other ideas in there where they are also championing women's rights and things like that, like the social justice aspect. But of course, Nike is just so old and so much money, they can do more things. As a smaller brand with limited resources, you want to hammer a single single message. And so I really love what Andy Raskin is talking about, the idea of a strategic narrative for differentiation. So basically, you're changing the way you think about the product. And so you don't position yourself against the competition. It says that we do it 10% faster or cheaper, or get 10% more leads, because that's like an improvement offer, which is nice, but it's not many people will care about it. A much more attractive way to sell your company, or to market your company, is through this lens of a strategic narrative, which is what change is happening in the world that should change what you are doing. So right now you're using a strategy. Let's take this content marketing example. So right now your strategy is to write these long form blog posts, and you get as many backlinks as possible, and then but the world has changed. Since 2010, there's now so many new blogs, and then the barrier of entry has gone up this much, and then all the old companies are they have so much
content.
Yeah, so it's not possible for you to outrank HubSpot. It's just not a thing you can do. And so instead, the old strategy is not working anymore. The world has changed. So in this new world, there are all these other things that are happening, and the way to compete is now through doing, let's say, different types of content. And now you can start talking about your product, where how these features that you position them through this context, that in this new world, you need these new features to compete. This is exactly what, for instance, classic example is Drift did. So instead of being another live chat tool, which was already a pretty mature category, they changed the narrative and saying the world has changed, and everything is instant messaging, right? We're sending text messages. Well, stuff happens in Facebook Messenger, and we're still selling through forms like it's 1997. The way people want to communicate is radically changed, and so fuck forms, and you need chatbots, so it's like live chat. So selling the same thing, but you set the context of how the world has changed. You need a new strategy to adapt. So that's essentially that's differentiating through brand.
That's a really good example. I had Drift on the podcast, so I'm glad you brought them up. And I also follow Andy Raskin. I think he has some really great expertise around strategic narrative, and that's a big thing that I also, as I meet with startups and start working with them, and I ask them, like, what do you think are your benefits to the user? And what comes up 9 times out of 10 is we're cheaper. We're cheaper than.
So cheaper,
and I almost want them to delete that off of their slides, off of their material. Like, don't focus so much on that. That doesn't matter. To like, cheaper is not what you want to. Yes, okay, that's fine.
It's good if you're cheaper, but that you don't want that to be the only thing going for you. If you're a challenger brand, it's okay to be cheaper than the market leader. Like if I'm a new CRM, sure, it has to be cheaper than HubSpot. That's fine. However, unless you have some sort of a magical structural advantage of how you can deliver it so much cheaper, it's not a sustainable competitive approach. If other people are able to do it as cheaply as you, it's suicidal. And probably people are able to do it as cheap as you, unless, again, you have some radical innovation. And radical innovation, like there's an example that comes to mind from the Blue Ocean book, is the Barefoot wines, these Australian wines, cheap wines that you see in every supermarket. So they're offering, a comparable quality wines that are like $15 a bottle. They're selling it for like $6 a bottle. And how are they able to do it so cheaply is that they just took out one process, which is the aging process from winemaking, which saved them a ton of money, and so they're able to now sell the wine for cheaper. So that's a structural advantage. They're actually able to offer it cheaper because their manufacturing is cheaper. Unless you have that sort of a structural advantage, all your people are from Bangladesh, I don't know, keep them trapped in a basement. Unless you're an evil capitalist and using child labor, like what is your structural advantage really?
That's a great example, and I did not know that. I always wondered, like, what is it about this wine that makes it so cheap? So thanks for sharing that. So I want to ask you then, what would you say are some, actually, how do you keep your marketing fresh? Like, how do you stay creative? We've talked a lot about how you clearly have some structure in what you do in your day-to-day, like in the mornings, you're thinking about content, what am I putting out there? And then you're thinking about your businesses and strategy and very structured, but how do you stay creative?
Well, you need to be constantly stimulating your brain. So some people are original thinkers, especially like people who are artists. My wife is an artist, so I have a window into how the artist mind works, and it's very different from mine. So I'm a synthesizer, meaning that idea here, my own experience. I read a book, I listen to a podcast, and poof, I have this new insight. I synthesize. Whereas my wife and her artist friends, they just have original fucking ideas, which is magical. And so you can choose which one you are, or you have to know which one you are. And I don't know much about the artist way, but I think it's the creativity. There are some really great books about it by Scott Berkun is an author that's written some really good stuff on it. Basically, it's about doing it. So if you're producing content every day, you get more creative. If you're just thinking about content but never shipping, you're not getting any more creative. So just doing it is key to getting better at it and more creative and so on and so forth. And two is like you keep an eye out on what other people are doing, because also like if everybody's zigging, like you want to zag, and you don't want to be the me too, unless again you have a completely new idea somehow, but that's already creative.
Yeah, it's something that I think about, right? Like I want to know what people are doing, but I also want to just like do my own thing. So I don't really check on what everyone else is doing. I just kind of know about it, but keep my thoughts on like in my own lane, if that makes sense, right? Because if you're constantly looking, it's kind of the same thing with your business. If you're constantly looking at what is the competition doing? Oh, they changed their website. Oh, we need to change our website too, right?
Right.
That puts you in a bad cycle.
That's a quick path to sameness, where like, oh, they did this, we also need this. They did that, and we also need that. And maybe you sometimes do. If you're, obviously clearly worse, then you need to catch up, So it's good to benchmark in the sense. For instance, like what happens with how video quality has increased over the years. So if you're still on a 1 pixel webcam, 1 megapixel, webcam, your video quality would be so much worse than like you just need to up your game, to have feature parity, so to speak.
Yeah.
However,
we can talk all day about that, how I need to probably, as a podcast host, up my game with a camera and with a microphone. But I also differentiate myself in that way, right? Because I am a podcast for startups, talking about startups with startups. So I'll let that story ride.
Yeah, if your brand is all about scrappy and getting it done with whatever is at hand, and that's just fits your brand,
Right.
If your podcast brand is like I'm the premium content about this thing, then you also need to look the part.
Absolutely. Yeah, great points. What are some bad recommendations that you have heard about related to marketing, related to content? What are some bad recommendations out there?
Okay, so not a bad one, but limited. So everybody says do user research. Like interview your customers, understand their customers better than others. Okay, it's great advice. However, an unwanted, undesirable second-order consequence is that all the feedback the customers are giving you is category level feedback. So that means that all your competitors, they're also doing user research. They're getting the exact same insight. So all of you are solving for the exact same problem. And the end result is that you're going to be exactly the same. Add here competitive benchmarking, and you have like guaranteed sameness. So there's this great book that I also recommend people check out. It's called Stop Listening to Your Customer and Start Hearing Your Brand, which basically talks about that very phenomenon. And so before you do all that user research, which you should do, also have a strong idea of what you're about. That brand thing that we talked about earlier. Have a strong inner sense. What are we willing to do or not to? So if I am Ryanair, I am low cost all the way. And if people are giving me feedback, there's not enough leg room, I ignore that shit. It doesn't matter. I am in the business of cheap. I'm not, oh, well, let's actually increase our prices so we could put, more leg room. No. Or IKEA, what is IKEA? People are saying, I don't want to assemble my furniture, or like it's not, very high quality. It's just, a bunch of, plywood. Yeah, but IKEA knows what the business it's in. So they're not in the business of building furniture that lasts forever. They're not in the business of expensive, high-quality furniture. They're in the business of cheap, affordable furniture that looks good, So you need to understand the business you're in, and then you do the user research. So you can ignore half the feedback, because that's like whatever.
Yep. I feel like you become really good at your craft when you know what to ignore, because I think it's easier to say yes than it is to say no, and to take away the stuff that's just not needed, not necessary, will take up more time, will take up more of your Trello board, Trello cards of like to-dos, right? That is the skill that
Exactly, yes.
is
Or like which audiences you serve, and and all this stuff. Like, though it's tempting to try to serve everybody, because more money. But like, if you chase every dollar, you're just gonna spread yourself too thin, and nobody will care.
That's right. Absolutely. Okay. I definitely wanted to ask you, because you have such huge followings on LinkedIn and on Twitter. What are your top tips for posting content on LinkedIn? And then we'll switch, because that's probably different tips than it is for Twitter. And I'd love to hear.
Actually, I think it's pretty much the same. The only difference between Twitter and LinkedIn, as I see it, is the posting frequency. So on LinkedIn, every time you make a new post, LinkedIn will reduce the distribution of your previous post. So you're cannibalizing your own content. So you don't want to be posting more than once a day. I'm only posting once a day. Some people even do every other day, and say that's even better. Whereas in Twitter, you can do a tweet a minute. Like, it doesn't harm the distribution of your other tweets. So that's the key difference between these two channels. Similarities between the two channels is that you can't use links, because that will instantly kill your distribution. If you use video, use the native video, not YouTube links, because they don't want people to leave their platform. And share stories. People really like stories, and not like. But I mean, I also see people having success telling other people's stories. How Bill was a young student, and then he did this, and then he built Microsoft and became really rich. Okay, that's also fun. And some people do that successfully. But even better is I think your own stories. So you've been around. I mean, unless you're spring chicken, in which case, sure, tell us about Bill Gates. But if you've been around, tell your own stories. And what I mean by stories is that just think about what you have learned over the years. So my last 12 months, okay, what were the 5 things I have learned over the last course of the year, or in my last 5 years of doing SEO, here are my top 10 things. If I were to hire a brand new person doing what I do, what was that? what would be the advice that I would pass on? So this kind of like stories, and then you speak from experience. It does really, really well. So like, talk to your younger self, essentially. So that, and phrasing your opinions. So that's really what we're dealing with. Your personal observations strongly. And I don't mean polarization where you say stupid shit just to get people riled up and polarize on purpose. But if you believe something, you emphasize to make a point, and you err on the side of making generalizations. Everybody knows that like generalizations don't apply to every use case. But if you phrase it, then it's like, well, sometimes in these circumstances, and then like I have seen sometimes it happens when like you soften what you're saying, it will become so weak that people don't really care. But if you have a strong like, this is fucked up, like and then you say what is fucked up, people will really resonate with it. You put emotion into what you're saying. That it does something. It does something magical. And yes, you will have people come out of the woodworks and say, no, it's wrong. And also, like, in this circumstance, it doesn't apply. And then I actually like what you hate, and that's fine. Actually, it's good because they're feeding the algorithm, and you get more reach for a post. So you need to be, you need to have a tough skin. You need to be tough skin in the sense that people would disagree with you, and it's uncomfortable if people disagree with you. So just have to ignore it. I mean, think about Hollywood stars, like most beloved people, like Brad Pitt, the kind of shit he takes every day. Anything that Elon Musk is tweeting, the god among men, as many fanboys as he has, every tweet he's getting taken down, like people are ripping into him. So, and how is it? He is controversial, has strong opinions, and so it just comes with the territory. If you want to play in the big leagues, like you need to have strong opinions and be okay with being disagreed with.
Yeah, I encourage that. I want more of that disagreement to come up because I learn from that too. It's a good thing. You see what people have different experiences. You learn from everybody's experience, and it's like a good thing to get people kind of riled up about something and then have a discussion.
What I would advise against is getting into the arguments in comments or like tweets. It just goes nowhere, leaves everybody feeling drained, and everybody has this massive need to be right. Like, oh my God, somebody's wrong on the internet. All right. So resist that urge. If somebody says something you don't agree with, say nothing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you spend the whole day in like Twitter fights.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you. Thanks so much for this advice. And you're definitely I love your personality. It really came out in this episode. I think it's the most swear words in any of my episodes. So
I thought I was going to like over here.
That's a great differentiator, Pep, for sure. So you can reach Pep on LinkedIn. He's at Peep Laja, and on Twitter, you can find him at Peep Laja. And then you can find out more about Wynter going to wynter.com. You can also find out more about CXL by going to cxl.com. And is Speero.com?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We covered a lot of fun, interesting topics, and I appreciate everything that you bring to the game, to the industry.
Thank you, Anna.